I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delaney Fisher, and today I'm chatting with Támara Hill, who is a licensed psychotherapist and international and board certified trauma therapist. And we're discussing betrayal trauma today, which is a Helpster's Choice topic. If you'd like to submit and vote on topics that are covered on the podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/selfhelpless. We have our next submissions coming up pretty soon where you can submit an idea or vote or do both. And the winning topic or topics get covered. I book an awesome specialist or guest to answer the questions that you have. It's a good time. Some of my favorite episodes of Self-Helpless have been topics that were selected by subscribers. So thank you for your participation. It's really cool to see what you're interested in learning more about. So today, Támara is sharing what betrayal trauma is exactly and the symptoms associated with it. And this was really fascinating because this type of trauma in particular is often dismissed by people, whether it's people who simply don't understand it, but it's also dismissed by people who experience it. So they're dismissing themselves because they don't think it's that big of a deal or that big of a trauma. But as Tamara will explain, the symptoms are PTSD symptoms, basically, that should be taken seriously and definitely more serious than some people currently take this issue, which is one of the biggest takeaways that I got from this conversation. And there's also a misconception that betrayal trauma is only linked to romantic relationships. But Tamara clears that up very quickly that, this can happen in any close relationship, whether it's a friendship, familial, business partnership, whatever it might be. And that the deeper the connection and intimacy, basically, the more severe the symptoms. And of course, the amount of betrayal traumas that somebody experiences is a huge factor for this, whether that's in different areas. I mean, she talks about institutional betrayal as well. So somebody might be experiencing it in different categories or several in the same category. So all these play a role in what symptoms may look like for somebody. And I offered a past personal experience for the episode today for the sake of breaking this down with Tamara. So hope that helps bring some clarity or awareness to your own experiences and how they may be impacting you in your present life. All right, here is my chat with Tamara Hill. What is betrayal trauma and how is it similar or different to other types of trauma out there?
Yeah. I hear this question so often because I think a lot of people think that betrayal trauma is just, I'm in a relationship and I've been betrayed, but it's way more than that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's an ongoing relationship that is hard to escape from, and there's been significant betrayal. There's been significant confidentiality, privacy, and boundaries that have just been disregarded. It could be a family, where an individual experiences loss of trust in an individual that they are dependent on. Um, Dependency is a major part of betrayal trauma because a lot of the relationships that include betrayal trauma are relationships that are not easy to get out of, like a marriage, or a relationship with a sibling or a parent. The impact of that betrayal is what causes the trauma. And the trauma could then turn into physiological symptoms, very similarly to PTSD. And I know you guys are probably familiar with PTSD, but all the symptoms that happens in an individual who has PTSD also happens in an individual that has been severely betrayed.
Mhm. Oh, so you just hit on more questions that I had for you because when you hear betrayal trauma, I think a majority of people link it to romantic relationships. But of
Mhm.
course, I wanted to hear. I'm sure this happens in other areas,
Oh,
familial,
yeah.
friendships, the workplace, stuff like that. And
Yes.
the physical symptoms involved are pretty drastic. I mean, it can really impact somebody's well-being and trajectory and stuff going
Yes.
forward. I heard you say something on your YouTube channel that I had never heard before, this
Yeah.
concept of deceptive affection. Can you
Yeah.
explain what that is?
I think a lot of people define it incorrectly, but really what it is it's I'm appearing to be a person in your world that loves you, cares about you unconditionally. But at the core of our relationship, there really is deception because I'm not being honest with you about how I really feel in this relationship. And this happens mainly in romantic relationships. I'm showing you that I could possibly care. I'm buying you things. I'm taking you on dates. I've asked you to marry me, all of that. But at the core of our relationship, there's really a loss of, or there never was, love, unconditional love, affection, true honesty. It's deceptive. The relationship is really not the way that it appears on the outside.
Okay. Now, does this also relate to, like, let's say somebody's in the workplace and they have to kind of pretend that they like their boss or something because maybe they want the promotion or they want to do some good work at the company, but they really
Yes.
don't. Is that considered the same thing, or is it different because the relationship is not as inherently close as like a family member or spouse?
Yeah, such a good question. I think it's different because in deceptive affection, there has to be some level of connection. There has to be a possibility that there's love involved, dedication. In a work relationship, I wouldn't say it's the same.
Mhm.
No,
Okay.
no.
So that intimacy or trust or what you think is a trusting relationship,
There
right?
you go.
So would you say the impact of betrayal trauma, let's say if it's on a spectrum and there's
Yeah.
different ways people experience or process it, is it how close the relationship is that leads to kind of the biggest impact? Or do you
Mm,
find that it's almost like a layered cake, like there's a pattern of betrayal in this person's history, whether it's friend, family, workplace,
mhm.
and that's a big impact, or is it a mix of everything?
Yeah, it's a mix of everything.
Okay.
It's a mix of everything.
Yeah.
Jennifer Freed, between 1994 and 1996, drew that conclusion when she came up with the term betrayal trauma. You know,
Mhm.
and she says that the significance of the relationship is equal to the impact of the trauma. So the more significant the relationship, the more impactful the trauma. Consider, for example, going to mass or going to church or, being in a Catholic school. There's kind of like this expectation of trust. And it's almost required, in the relationship. Let's say, for example, someone in that religious environment betrays your trust. When trust is really required and expected, the impact of that could just be major. And it can cause complex PTSD. It can cause PTSD. And again, that's because of the significance of the relationship. The more significant the relationship, the more impactful the trauma.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense because I mean, it can absolutely turn your reality on its head. You thought something
Yes.
was one way, you realize it's different, and I think then you start to kind of question everything. I know
Mhm.
I'll just share personal examples so we can kind of get into the symptoms and why they occur. But I was cheated on by my first boyfriend. We were together like 4.5 years off and on, and
Ugh.
had basically another girlfriend behind my back. So finding
Oh
out that he
God.
kind of led a double life, and I was so surprised by how it physically impacted me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't
Yeah.
sleep, I was having nightmares. I was very distrusting of any new people maybe coming into my life at the time, stuff like that. And so
Yes.
could we talk about the symptoms that happen and why they
Mm.
happen, maybe from a scientific perspective?
Mm. Yes. I'm sorry to hear that as well, by the way.
Thanks, girl.
Yes, you're welcome. It's not you, believe me. That is so common of a reaction. And really what happens is this: we automatically have a brain and physiological response to betrayal and trauma as well as PTSD. And I talk about this a lot on my channel. There's an almond sized structure in the middle of the brain known as the amygdala, and that is where our emotional memories are housed. Attached to the amygdala is the hippocampus, and it really gives us context. So let me give you an example. Let's say in this relationship where you've had this betrayal, the first thing your amygdala is going to do is remind you. This is where flashbacks come from. It's going to remind you of what happened to you by a smell in the environment that triggered you, a day where you're just having all kind of triggers in your environment. And then the hippocampus says, remember when you found out you were being cheated on? You had this on, you ate that, you didn't eat, you didn't sleep for weeks. So
Mhm.
both of those brain systems together really makes it hard for us sometimes to heal from trauma. And it causes flashbacks, causes nightmares, causes even negative memories. You could be walking in walking in a mall and catch a whiff of something, and your nose sends that signal to your amygdala and your hippocampus, and there you are remembering that whole experience of betrayal all over again. Let me
Right.
also say we have fight or flight. And fight or flight is a physiological response where the body is going into a physiological reaction to trauma. So you have, we're really rendered helpless because you have the body that's trying to fight or flee. And then you have the brain, the amygdala, and the hippocampus that's saying, remember when this happened? So all three of those systems can really make it hard to heal from trauma and betrayal.
So
Yeah.
interesting. So basically, I would assume it's like your body just goes into, I have to keep you safe at all costs in a
Yes.
way. And is that why your digestive system or appetite changes, the sleep changes? Because is it preserving as much energy as possible just to focus solely on survival mode? We got to keep you
Mhm.
safe. And they don't
Absolutely.
have enough energy for everything else.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
very interesting. That instance happened many years ago. And so
Yes.
now as I'm older, there's been a couple other instances, not the same thing, but some betrayal, trauma, or deceit,
Yeah.
but it
Mhm.
almost feels like, and I'd love to hear your perspective. When it happens kind of once, it almost feels like, okay, that's an isolated incident
Yeah.
and maybe that won't happen again. And I felt like I could recover a little bit more quickly. But
Yes.
at like maybe the third time and it feels like a pattern, it almost
Yes.
feels like a pile on and it feels like there was a deeper sense of hopelessness, at least from my
Mhm.
perspective. Can you share a little bit about what's going on there when it becomes more
Yeah.
than one instance?
Absolutely. As you're talking, in my mind, I can hear the name of Martin Seligman. He's a social psychologist who did a study on learned helplessness. He was really trying to understand what happens to us when we experience these repeated traumas or betrayals. And what he found out was we all go through this phase of learned helplessness where this repeated trauma and betrayal over and over and over develops in us this fatigue, and it's almost like we
Right.
get tired and we say, you know what, I'm done. I continue to go through this over and over again. And there's no way for me to escape. And so the brain and the body just shuts down and says, I can't fight this anymore. So it's for me, the way that I see it as a therapist is it really is a period of learned helplessness that puts us in that state of, you know what, I can't do it anymore. I give up.
That makes perfect sense. That's exactly what it can feel like, that just kind of
Yeah.
deep exhaustion. And I
Mhm.
know for me personally, now that I'm older, it felt very like I couldn't trust my own judgment. I was really
Yes.
having a hard time trusting any new person that wanted to come into my life because I didn't know
Yes.
if I could properly vet them. I was looking at things a little bit differently and I felt like I had to catch up on a lot of education. I had to really
Yes.
learn, why am I susceptible to this? What's going on in
Mhm.
my history? How can I get the type of therapy that I need so this does not keep happening?
Yes.
So that was a good thing that came out of it, but also there was a lot
Yeah.
of self-blame. How am I so stupid that I couldn't see this early on?
Yeah.
And why did I not trust my gut? And how come other people could see these things clearly that I couldn't? So can we talk a little bit
Mm.
about that piece too of just the
Mhm.
aftermath of a betrayal or deceit of some kind?
Oh, yeah. That's where we get into the spiritual component of why do I do this? That's where we kind of get stuck. I just told a client the other day, it's almost like we get stuck, almost like we're in quicksand. We feel like we're sinking. And instead of, putting up our dukes and fighting back, we kind of implode and
Yeah.
and we internalize and we start to self-blame. That's actually a major part of betrayal trauma. It's that process of, why did I allow this to happen? Why couldn't I see the signs? Why can't I get out of this? I'm stronger than this. What we fail to realize, though, is we're dealing with a loss of strength, a loss of psychological willpower. Betrayal takes all the energy out of you that you need to fight back, and you're actually having a physiological and neurological response to life. And so because of that, it's really hard sometimes to step out of that. And it's almost like this defense mechanism in a sense. I
Mhm.
just I can't make sense out of this. So I'm just gonna go within and self-blame and withdraw. And to me, that's a normal reaction to trauma, but it's a very hard place to get out of. It's very much a psychological and neurological issue. It's not really your fault. It's I can't get out of this because of what my brain is doing and what this trauma has done to my body as well.
Do you think it's
Yeah.
almost like a survival thing? Like, if it's
Yes.
my fault, I can control it and fix it. If
Mhm.
it's like something else in my external world, I
Yep.
don't have control over
There you
it.
go.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yes.
Another like
Yes.
survival mechanism kicking in.
Yeah.
Wow. What is the relationship between enmeshment, let's say in a family system,
Mhm.
and like this betrayal, deceit situation?
Oh, yeah. Enmeshment is like this dependency on the mind and the brain of another human being. This could be between a mother and a child or mom and dad, and there's this overly dependent and tight relationship that is very dysfunctional and toxic. And
Mm.
if there's betrayal trauma that has impacted that unit, it can really spin the family out of control because enmeshment says we are together to survive and we are this enmeshed so that we can survive. But when betrayal gets into the midst of that or in the middle of that, it can really spin the family out of control. I've seen divorces, I've seen families going no contact, just really putting up that wall and saying, I'm done. Because the
Yeah.
enmeshment is so toxic that once betrayal gets in the middle of that, it's like there's no turning back to fix anything.
Yeah, we have had a lot of people write in about this concept of, if there's a friendship in their life, it was much
Yeah.
easier to remove and make space from than if it's a family member. Can you talk
Yes.
a little bit about that? What if somebody is realizing that it's some kind of family dynamic that is
Mhm.
not good for them and they really need to separate themselves, but they're feeling like the guilt and obligation and all of that?
Mhm.
But if a friendship had this quality, they would remove themselves.
That's an awesome question. That's like a whole other chat.
We'll have to have you back for episode 2.
Oh my god. Yes, we're gonna need lunch and dinner too. But to bring this down to bite size, let me
Yeah.
just say, and I've been here in my past as well, that I think the world has sold and successfully sold this idea that family is everything. And with that selling of the concept comes this feeling of guilt and betrayal when you realize your family is not that kind of a family. I mean,
Mm.
family's beautiful when it's healthy and it's mutual, and everybody's working together. But when it's toxic, dysfunctional, unhealthy, and there's betrayal trauma,
Yeah.
you have to separate it. But I think the world has sold us successfully this concept that family is everything. We're not to go against our family, but if it's a friend, say adios amigos, because you can get another friend down the road. On my channel, I often encourage the people that watch me live that family is not necessarily everything when they've hurt you, and you need to walk away, walk away. If you need to put up boundaries, put up boundaries. If you need to limit contact, limit contact. The boundaries in a friendship is not any different in a family dynamic. It should be the same. If you
Mm.
have to divorce, divorce. If you have to say goodbye to your family, say goodbye to your family. It's to me, there's no difference when it comes to boundaries, care, respect, all of that. There's no difference between friends and family. I think we should hold the same expectations in a family situation that we do in a friendship.
That's a great simple tip. If this was a friend that was
Yeah,
treating me this way, what would I do? And not
exactly.
accept that or tolerate that in other settings. Um,
Yes.
it seems like talking about somebody behind their back or doing things behind somebody's back is part of this
Yeah.
idea of betrayal and deceit and all of that.
Yes.
However, what about situations where, let's say, somebody is trying to safely
Mhm.
leave a relationship and they have to maybe call on certain people behind somebody's back and say, this is my plan, this is what I need
Yeah.
help with, right? You're technically talking about somebody behind their back, but
Yeah.
what is that deceit and betrayal as well? What's the difference or similarity there?
Yeah. So, let's say this is a domestic violence kind of a situation where you have to get out of the relationship. I have clients like this now. And the only way that they can get out of it is to share with somebody else that this is my plan. I'm afraid, I'm terrified, but I need to get out of this. Can you help me navigate this? I think if safety is involved, that's not betrayal. In order to get out of that relationship safely, you're going to have to talk about that person behind their back and somehow connect with people that can maybe help you. So I wouldn't say that's betrayal at all,
Right.
especially if there's a safety component.
Right.
Um, but if it's a relationship where you also need to go behind that person's back and talk to their friends or family because they're acting odd or they need psychological help or they're being abusive, that's not betrayal either. You really are trying to get a feel of the situation,
Mm,
and I think
yeah.
that's healthy.
That makes a lot of sense because I think,
Yeah.
if you have been on the receiving end of a betrayal trauma and that self-blame starts kicking in and you
Yes.
start talking about it, reaching out for help, you might feel like you're being the manipulative person by talking
Mhm.
about it because of that self-blame kicking in. And so I think
Right.
it's important for people to kind of determine which one is it. And so would you say it's more about the intent and that's what people can
100%.
focus on? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the intent for safety or something healthy versus I'm just going to speak meanly about somebody because I
That's
want
right.
to control a narrative or control them or manipulate something. Very different
Absolutely.
situations. Okay,
Very
that's
different.
that's incredibly helpful. What have been the things that you've noticed that have helped people heal from this kind of thing? What are some of the first steps and maybe even like long-term care?
A lot of people that have betrayal trauma, they're not gonna come to therapy. And, that's the sad part because they don't see the trauma as real trauma,
Ah,
but I think a lot of people feel like, okay, I was betrayed, but it's betrayal. Who doesn't go through that? But it is trauma that needs to be worked through in therapy. So when I'm dealing with clients who are dealing with this, the number one thing that I tried to do is make sure that the therapeutic relationship is built on trust and honesty because having a relationship with a trustworthy therapist really is going to help the individual restructure their thinking about relationships.
yeah.
And so that therapeutic relationship is key, but I also suggest to people who are dealing with this kind of trauma that the only way to heal from this and work through it is to really attach yourself to people or environments that are independence supportive, meaning these people and environments support your independence. You can trust them and they're not going to hurt you. The healing
Mhm.
process happens when you're connected to that kind of either therapist or environment because the your idea of a relationship has to then it has to be reinvented and recreated.
So your relationship with your therapist kind of becomes the example of what a healthy reciprocity can look like and all of
There you go.
boundaries and all of that. Yeah, because if you've never had that displayed for you, you don't know what that looks like. And then you're
No.
trying to create something healthy for yourself as you get older, but you don't have an example. I know
Yeah.
for me too, as far as like the kind of the last thing you want to do is get into therapy if there's a
Yes.
betrayal trauma. We talked about that exhaustion and kind of hopelessness and
Oh, yeah.
and all that and the burnout that can come from it. I know for me, the last thing I felt like doing was like Googling where I can find a support group. It
There
felt
you
like
go.
way too much work
Yes.
to do that simple thing. And so I luckily had a
Yes.
loved one that helped me get into something and took me and all that. And without that, I don't think I would have done it because I was just laid up in bed. And
Yes.
so it is nice if you can let some people in that you do trust who might be able
Yes.
to give you a phone number of somebody or offer to drive you
Mhm.
somewhere if you need it because you're in a
Yeah.
different headspace at that time.
Very
Um,
true.
and so, how does somebody start to be able to trust again
Yeah.
if their own experience or evidence has been you don't always actually know somebody and
Mm.
they could be doing something that you don't know about? I mean, how do you do it?
I wish we had clinical research. We
Yeah.
don't.
Mm,
We don't. We lack the clinical research to show us how to work through betrayal trauma and how to work through the process of trusting again. Usually, if I have clients come to me for treatment around trauma, it's like I have to be creative and pull together evidence-based tools. So I typically rely on what we call trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, where we go through tackling those negative thoughts, tackling that self-blame, tackling that self-doubt, normalizing the pain of that experience, processing and reflecting upon it, and then developing coping skills. In addition to that, it's a good idea to get blood work done, start taking vitamins, start taking care of your body better, getting better sleep, getting rid of people in your environment that you really don't trust, really getting involved in support groups, self-help, educating yourself. It really is a multi-dimensional approach to getting back up again, because you've been knocked
Yeah.
down by that trauma and that pain and that hurt. And I, just to self-disclose, I personally know what that is like just from past experience. And you really do have to not only tackle the psychological piece, but tackle the physiological and neurological pieces as well.
Right.
It's a full body
Absolutely.
recovery.
Yeah, that has been my experience too. And when your reality is kind of flipped upside down and you are like,
Yes.
whoa, I thought this was one way and it's not. I, for one, just had to cling to the things that I knew for sure were
Yes.
real or true to me. Like, who is one person I can trust that I can talk to?
There you go.
I know going for a walk makes me feel good. I mean, like, really
Yes.
going back to the like bare minimum basics in a way because it took a while, I guess, for my body to process the things that had
Yes.
happened.
So
Is
true.
there a relationship between this kind of trauma and codependency?
I'll give you a little bit of an example of a previous client. I was seeing a client several years ago, and not only was she betrayed by dad, mom, and both of her siblings, she was adopted. So she was betrayed by her adopted family. What she
Mm.
did, and this kept her stuck for so long, she grew up. She was, I'm going to say she had a rocky relationship with her adoptive family from the time she was adopted, which was like 9 or 8, all the way until about 15, 16. She stopped trusting in her adoptive family, but what she did at 18 changed her life, and I think it's still impacting her negatively today. She found a boyfriend, she found a guy that she trusted, and she became so codependent that she lost a part of who she was. She lost a part of her identity. And I remember her coming to sessions, and I would identify several things in her that just didn't look like her because I had her between the ages of 9 and 15. So I knew who she really was. But she
Um,
had taken on the character, the thought patterns, the behaviors of this boyfriend, and it's continuing even to today. It's a
wow.
very codependent relationship. Really the psychology of her situation is I've been betrayed. So now I've gotten into a relationship that I trust and I'm this enmeshed with and this codependent with that I don't even know who I am. And it's really hard to see her outside of the boyfriend. It's very unhealthy of a dynamic.
Mhm. And is that
Yeah.
so the codependent part of that
Yeah.
is that I don't know, if I'm codependent with you, you won't betray me? Like what do you
Absolutely.
so if I like the same things you like and I'm basically part of you, you can't betray
Yes.
yourself, right? You're not going to betray you. Is that what's going on in the brain?
At a subconscious level for her, I think she feels like if I just hold on to this relationship with everything I have, he's not going to betray me. This is a person I finally have found that I could trust. And if I just hold on to him and be like him, he's not going to betray me.
How can we start to acknowledge the things in ourselves that we need to change? How can we look at, all right, what have I kind of absorbed from these experiences that I need to do differently? And what do those things kind of usually look like?
Self awareness is really at the core of that. It's building that self awareness a little at a time, whether that's through going to therapy, getting a part of social groups, really clinging to people that you do trust, asking them to, kind of feed you a little bit. What is it about me that you've noticed? I know that anytime I go to my mom and I say, Mom, I'm having a hard time with this. My mom's very honest. She's going to give me feedback and maybe tell me I need to change a little bit of this or that. So clinging to that person that's going to be honest with you is key. The other piece of this, I think, is developing what we call a growth mindset. And a growth mindset says that in order for me to heal and come out of this repeated pattern of behavior that I seem to have, I have to put myself intentionally in an environment that could be a mirror for me so that I could see those areas of my character, that continual way that I think about relationships and myself in life. It's going to show me where I need to change. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm saying developing and learning about a growth mindset and really embracing those people that can tell you about those areas of needed improvements. Those are two really important pieces to this.
Absolutely. For me personally, I have struggled with the people pleasing and then not
Yes.
not being honest in the moment, right? Not speaking up for myself or somebody else. And also not trusting my gut instinct when I knew there was something
Yes.
wrong. My people pleasing would kick in. I wouldn't want to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I've just looked at that so differently now, how really detrimental that's been.
I have to do this with myself as well. Just every now and then if I say yes to something, I have to ask myself, is that really a yes or should that have been a no? So being able to kind of again build that self-awareness, you can go back and say, wait a minute, was that okay? Was that not okay? Let me also throw in here journaling is very helpful. Every Sunday, I just sit with my journal and it kind of helps me go within and process. Is there something I need to be working on, you know?
I love that you have a weekly journaling practice. Sunday
Oh,
seems like
yeah.
a good day for it. As a mental health professional, and you mentioned that
Yeah.
you have experience with betrayal trauma, I'm sure all of us do in some respect.
Yeah.
Can it be hard as somebody who's experienced it, but also teaches how to be
Yes.
mindful and heal from it? Do you ever get caught, in your own behaviors and then have to kind of talk yourself out of them?
Mm.
What helps you as a mental health professional?
Oh my god. That was a revealing question. I feel like the tables have been turned. I really do. I do get stuck, and sometimes I recognize, "Okay, this is taking an emotional toll on me." So I either have to refer this client to somebody that I really trust, or I have to really go home, rest, and journal my thoughts and feelings and make sure that I'm where I need to be. Because the minute I start feeling anger, the minute I start feeling some kind of personal attack, or, I start getting memories of past betrayals, then I know that I'm being sucked in and I need to let go. Just really keeping a close eye on my own thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
Do you have any favorite quotes?
Not a quote, but I think it's more of a personal it's a personal mindset that kinda keeps me steady, which is constantly striving towards authenticity, whether it's on my channel, whether it's with clients in my personal life, that's just the key for
Absolutely.
me. Just not putting on any airs and, really upholding clarity and
Mhm.
connecting with people from the heart. That's
Absolutely.
authenticity for me.
Beautiful. Maybe let's say a couple, for example,
Mhm.
experience betrayal trauma,
Yes.
experience betrayal trauma,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then heal from it, and move past it and build a new relationship. We think of, like cheating. Somebody has an affair
Yeah.
or something, but it also, I guess, could be like financial infidelity. People are
Absolutely.
hiding their, gambling issue or whatever it could be. What
Ooh,
has that if there's an example you can share, what does that kind of look like for you in your experience?
yeah. You have to have 2 people that can see themselves, so there has to be a level of self-awareness on both parts, and you have to have an individual say, "You know what? We need to go get treatment," because in order for us to move forward together, we have to have treatment, we have to have self-awareness, we have to be authentic with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I heard you mention this concept on your YouTube channel,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you coined this, but it's very catchy. The concept of family slander.
If it sounds catchy, I coined it. I
Yeah.
it's I'm going to take a personal situation that maybe you have talked to me about in confidence, and
Mhm.
I have then taken that information and I've gone to somebody else about it, and so that other person may choose to voice their opinion about it, text you or email you about it, visit you about it, and people are talking negatively about you in the family context. And so in a sense, you don't have any room to protect yourself. This family member has run off and taken your confidential information, and it's become kind of like this volleyball, you know? That
Right.
person hits that ball to that person, and you don't have any room to just say, wait a minute, I didn't expect that this was coming." So family slander.
Okay, yeah, because you had mentioned, like, if you are in a family system or, somebody else's where it's almost like they set up alliances and treaties, and this
Yes.
this person tells this person everything, but doesn't say any
Oh,
like, the
yeah.
lack of transparency, right? That is a
Yes.
problem, and, if you've grown up in something like that, you might not know that that is not what every family does or how every
So
family
true.
behaves, right? So
Yes.
why is this an issue, and what can people do instead? What can
Yes.
you do or say instead of engaging in that behavior?
Well, yeah. I think the best thing to do is number one, examine what needs to be my boundary right now. Do I need to have a flexible boundary where I say, you know what, this is happening, who cares? Or do I need to put up a rigid, healthy boundary that says, I'm not going to talk to you about this. I
Mm,
had no control over you finding out, but I do have control over saying, I'm not going to talk about this. And I
mm,
think that's okay.
right. Is there anything that we didn't cover about this concept that you wanted to share that we didn't cover? Whether it was
Yeah.
symptoms, situations, examples, anything.
Betrayal trauma theory, there's 4 pieces to this, and I did wanna mention this earlier, and I should have brought it up.
Mhm.
Betrayal trauma can also happen, of course, in a friendship or with a peer. We call that interpersonal betrayal trauma.
Okay.
It can also happen institutionally, so we call that institutional betrayal trauma. So it could be like a church, it could be a hospital that's betrayed you, it could be any institution. And then there's intimate partner betrayal trauma and parental, 4 different kinds that you can experience, and can you imagine somebody who's experienced all 4?
Not know
Or
that. It's like that the concept of complex, PTSD,
yes,
right? Where it's not an isolated incident, it's coming kind of from all ends. It feels like a
yeah,
pile-on effect.
yes,
Um,
it is.
I recently just learned about that same kind of concept in the area of grief, like compounded grief, where it's not maybe
Yes,
one loss, but you're experiencing multiple losses either at once or over time, and it just feels like, what more can a person take?
yes,
For somebody who is experiencing more than one type of betrayal trauma, or they feel like it's been kind of a pattern in their life, is
mhm.
there anything that you would wanna say to that person?
I think the most important piece for somebody who's going through this is figuring out who can I kind of considering your life as being on a platter. Who do I need to push out of my life? Who do I need to get out of my space? Who do I need to build boundaries with so that I can heal and somehow become a stronger individual? Because I really think you're as strong as your environment and associations. So
Mm,
sometimes it's how do I push these different people out of my world? Who is unhealthy for me so I can develop a growth mindset and have post traumatic growth and really experience some kind of healing.
great point. That brings up another question I have. Some people might be experiencing a betrayal and they're able
Yeah.
to kind of remove themselves from that environment where they
Mhm.
were hurt in and maybe go somewhere else, maybe go visit family or a friend or something and actually have a new space. Some people maybe cannot do that. They can't leave the environment that they were hurt
Right.
in. So, are there any kind of helpful tips that somebody kind of can feel like they're creating a new environment, even if they're in the same one? Anything else that they can do that reflects it's a new chapter for
Mhm.
them?
To be able to grow even if you're still around people or in an environment that's unhealthy, the first thing I encourage my clients to do is really start becoming like your own investigator or your own psychologist, trying your hardest to step outside of your own trauma and look at the dynamic of that relationship or that family and really try to understand it as a detective would. Knowledge is power. The more you learn about the dynamic, the more you learn about what happened to you, I think the easier it is to move from point A to point B. You
Yeah.
really do have to be your own investigator so that you can step outside of that trauma and heal, you know?
Yes. I know for me that, especially when I was younger, even just, removing anything from my site that was gifted to me by my ex-boyfriend, if I'm going through a
Yeah.
breakup, right? Just take
Yes.
all the things, put them away, out of sight. And
Out of
because
mind.
yeah, exactly. So, because that, if you're subconsciously seeing things that remind you of them, that could be
Yeah.
making you feel worse, or just, I don't know, just doing a deep dive of
Yes.
information on YouTube to learn about what's going on with you and all of
Yes.
that. But I've definitely been there where it's like, okay, how can I change up my physical environment to make it feel a little bit refreshed?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how do I just lay in bed and educate myself on some things and
Abs
just take it really slowly about what's going to be the next step.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Where can
Mhm.
people find you, your work, all that good stuff?
www.anchortoknowledge.com. And as you know, I'm on YouTube, so feel free to join me on my channel. Thank you so much.
What an interesting topic. Thank you to Tamara for breaking this down for us and to our patrons who voted for it. I hope this helps you reflect on past experiences that may be impacting your present life and helps you bring more understanding around it. If you find yourself feeling anxious about certain situations or settings, sounds, smells, it's your brain trying to protect you and there are options for working through it. So be kind to yourself about this, especially if you've been dismissing this as something that isn't a big deal or that isn't real trauma. As Tamara mentioned, it absolutely is, and it should be taken seriously. So, all right, everybody, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon. So glad you tuned into Self-Helpless. If you felt supported by this or past episodes, there are a couple ways you can help the show. Feel free to share it with a friend who may enjoy the variety of discussions we have here. Also, you can become a monthly or annual supporter of the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/selfhelpless. That's where you can pitch and vote on topics, submit questions for special guests, or be a silent supporter and not participate in any of that. 100% of Patreon and merch proceeds go directly to operating expenses that not only keep the show going through thick and thin, but also keeps it accessible to all with minimal ads. If you want to show a little extra love in, you can leave an Apple Podcast review or send an email to share how Self-Helpless has impacted you. All of this info and more goodies can be found at selfhelplesspodcast.com. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.